This is A Different Perspective with Kevin Randle. A retired U.S. Lieutenant Colonel, Kevin Randle has been studying UFOs for nearly 50 years. Kevin has investigated some of the most famous UFO cases in the world and has been consulted for dozens of documentaries about UFOs. Considered one of the leading experts into the Roswell UFO crash of 1947, Kevin has written more than 25 books about UFOs, including the recently published Roswell in the 21st Century. Now, here is the host of A Different Perspective, Kevin Randle.
And welcome to this edition of A Different Perspective. I'm Kevin Randle. I'll be joining with the guest, Bill Konkolesky. Bill, is that right?
Konkolesky, yep.
Okay. I'll be joining you in just a moment. First, I wanted to thank everybody for listening. And if you're enjoying the program, I ask you to go over to Amazon, take a look at my books, give it a rating. That helps spread the word, helps get the people interested in what we're doing here. So if you can take a little bit of time to do that, I would certainly appreciate this. Bill, my guest, has been the state director of the Michigan chapter of the MUFON UFO Network since 2004. After a lifetime of his own UFO and abduction encounters, he spent the last 2 decades actively investigating these otherworldly phenomenon, trying to make some sense of the bizarre events that have happened to him personally. He's discovered what he's discovered confronting these cosmic mysteries is that reality is far stranger than he could have imagined. Bill is the author of the autobiographical Experiencer Raised in Two Worlds, as well as the newly released Experiencer Two Worlds Collide. And his personal abduction experience have been chronicled in the SyFy documentary Abduction Diaries, streaming documentary Abducted by Aliens, UFO Encounters of the Fourth Kind, and the ABC News special UFOs Seeing is Believing. He has also served as a consultant to the History Channel's Hangar One and UFO Hunters, National Geographic Channel's The Truth Behind, as well as the Science Channel's Uncovering Aliens and Close Encounters. Bill, welcome to A Different Perspective.
Thanks so much for having me on, Kevin.
Well, I don't think it's really necessary for me to say what inspired your interest in UFOs, because obviously it's your own experience in UFOs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, UFOs took an interest in me before I took an interest in them.
Well, that's an interesting way of putting it. Let me do that. Well, let's do this. Obviously, you are an abductee, an experiencer. Give us a little bit about what that experience was like, how it maybe is related to other experiences or other abduction phenomena. What is the same, what is different, how your experience may have differed, all of that stuff in a nutshell.
Sure. My very first memory in life at age 2 is of a little gray entity coming up to the side of my crib. It wasn't anything I remembered later or was dreamlike in any way. It was absolutely real, burned into my memory, never forgot it. I had an experience at age 4 where they pulled me out of body. Age 7, I had an experience where they actually cut my arm. I still have the scar, and then in my teen years, several experiences, early 20s, several experiences. They tended to taper off actually as I got around 30, but the types of experiences I have really go across a wide gamut. I've had experiences while I'm alone. Experiences while I'm with others, experiences while I'm in bed, experiences when I'm in a car. So it's a broad variety of things. And if part of the question is why I don't focus on the term abductee, is it was really a term that was in vogue, I think, during the 80s and 90s to cover the broad spectrum of contact experience. It just happened to be what was used at the time, and it's a very victim-oriented language. And it's not to say that some of the things that have happened to me have been unpleasant. I've had unpleasant experiences, but I've had some neutral experiences, even what I consider some positive experiences. So I don't think people are ever going to go back to the term contactee. That Of the negative baggage that goes along with that early term of all these people making up stories of meeting Jesus on Venus and things like that. Um, but yeah, that's why I really think the term experiencer is a good modern term for it, and that's what I'd like to consider myself.
I've always thought of the difference between contactee and I'll use your term experiencer is that the contactee um, was sought out to be given messages and rides in airplanes or flying saucers and that sort of thing. And the experiencer was one who wasn't necessarily happy about the experience. They weren't given great messages. They weren't given rides all over the solar system and that sort of thing. It's sort of a dichotomy between the two experiences. And it's clear to me that the contactees, for the most part, were inventing their tales. George Adamski, of course, inventing his. I think he was once quoted as saying if it wasn't for prohibition, he could have gotten away from the UFO stuff. It's something of that nature. He was looking at it as a big con. And it seemed to me that the experiencers are those who are sort of reluctant participants, I guess is the way to put it. But the question I would have, and it's kind of the question that I think a lot of people have, is there any corroborative evidence that you have for your experiences that we could look at in an objective light?
Well, I can, a few things, I suppose. One is, I admittedly, like I said, I have a scar on my arm, but then again, somebody could always say, well, you know, you could have gotten that scar any possible way. There are a few incidents for which I have additional witnesses, two of which the people will probably be more than happy to discuss their side of it, though in the one experience that I had back when I was 7 years old, the neighbor boy who was 6 at the time, he saw a mist. There was a mist that rolled into my backyard while we were both back there climbing trees. And he saw the mist, but he didn't see the gray entity that was in the mist like I did. So he would at least corroborate as much as we were playing in the backyard and this strange mist, kind of like a stage fog, rolled through the backyard and kept going through the neighborhood. Strangely, it seemed intelligently controlled. And then when I was 18, two other friends of mine in the same car as me, we all saw the same UFO show in the sky, which was, we were parked at the time in front of another friend's house. It was dark. Blue ball of light arced over our car about the height of 2 telephone poles. And then a red ball of light, followed by a white ball of light that zigzagged all over the sky, followed by a red ball of light that grew and shrank in the middle of the sky. We all three saw that. The next day, a neighbor, not a neighbor, a coworker, told me before I had a chance to tell him of what he'd seen the previous night, which was of a blue UFO, which I thought also, to me, corroborated my what had happened, my sighting. And then in the mid-90s, I had an experience with a girl that I was dating, and we were up on a hill. It was dark at night, and we were frozen in place as 3 gray entities came up and inspected us, primarily her. And then once we were able to move again, we hustled out of there. And while I didn't tell her what had happened to us had anything to do with me, I suspect she knew it had everything to do with me, and very quickly broke up with me, and we haven't had contact since. Those are the ones that are off the top of my head.
Well, it strikes me that 2 of the 3 are just UFO sightings and not necessarily, or sightings of some kind, but not necessarily corroboration of an abduction experience.
You could say that. Like I said, in the first case, the boy saw the mist, but not the gray alien in it. And the second one, it was, a UFO sighting. Now, the UFO sighting is a lot more interesting than I described, and call it a plug for my book, but I go into detail some of the stranger aspects of it. But the other guys, just for what they for their part in it, they just saw some strange lights in the sky. And in the third case, yeah, I'm no longer in contact with the young woman that I shared the experience with.
And probably haven't been in contact with her for decades.
Yeah, 95 was when that happened. And as far as my track record goes with corroborating witnesses, I think I'm actually better than most people and their ability to find any sort of corroboration to what they're talking about. You know, and I get it. You know, people want me to not just share what happened. They want me to prove what happened. And it puts one sort of in a catch because these things, these beings, these entities, these intelligences, whatever you want to call them, are very good at what they do, at covering their tracks. And so you're stuck in a situation that either you can share what had happened to you, you not being an expert in their technology, and possibly being able to objectively best describe what's happening to you. You could either share what happened to you without being able to bring everything into a court of law, you know, for evidence, or you could wait until you have that hardcore evidence that is difficult to dispute, but that reduces the number of experiences able to share their accounts to a very, very tiny percentage. And so I thought, well, I'll be brave enough to tell what happened to me as it happened to me as best as I understand it. And what evidence I have is what evidence I have. If the rest of my account seems valid and people are able to get something from it, so be it. If not, it is what happened to me. And when I wrote it, both of these accounts, it was essentially started as notes to myself. Sort of a journal of what had happened to me, and then I sort of formatted them into book form and put them out that way. So these things I wrote as much for myself as a clear record of what had happened as, you know, as to share my story with the world.
Well, I've got a couple of questions for you, and we'll get to those in just a moment here, because I'm going to have to take a break. But I did want to suggest that there are many fine programs about the paranormal on the X Zone Broadcast Network at xzbn.net. So take a look at the listings at the X Zone website, and I'm sure you're going to find something there that'll spark your interest, not including, of course, this show as well. And so when we come back, I'm going to ask specifically about terrestrial explanations for these phenomenon, and some other the questions I think that are avoided when we discuss these sorts of things, meaning the experiences or the UFO sightings and the kind of the lack of corroborative evidence that we find in these sorts of things. Your books are Experiencer, Raised in Two Worlds, as well as Experiencer, Two Worlds Collide, which for some reasons reminds me of the movie World When Worlds Collide, but has no relevance here. The website is www.experiencer.me, and mine is www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com. And for those of you who are interested in my military background, you can take a look at www.vietnamgroundzero.blogspot.com. Vietnam Ground Zero is a single word for those of you who are interested in looking at that. And as I say, it's kind of my experiences in the military and how it relates to some of the research that I've been doing over the last many, many years. But I think you'll find some interesting things there as well. So as I say, when we come back, we'll be looking at some of these other aspects of, I'm going to say it, the abduction phenomenon, because that's what most of us know it as. And we'll be here with Bill, and he'll help us maybe understand some of that. So we'll be back right after this, so please stick around. I am back with Bill Konkolesky, we're talking, well, I call it alien abduction. He calls it experience. When we went away, I suggested I had a question that I wanted to ask. And the problem is with these sorts of experiences, there's usually nothing other than the testimony of the person who experiences it. Much of it gathered under hypnosis, which is a very poor way of gathering them. But I think a lot of these abduction scenarios are explained in terrestrial terms, meaning things like sleep paralysis. And I understand that sleep paralysis doesn't explain them all. I'm merely suggesting this as a very real explanation for some cases of alien abduction based on the descriptions provided by the experiencer. I was going to say victim, and I know that's really not quite the right term, but the person who experiences it. And we look at that sort of thing, and we look at the hypnotic regression involved in that. And you can correct me here if I'm wrong, but I get the impression that you haven't had a lot of hypnotic regression to access these memories. But we know from scientific study that even under hypnosis, people can be easily led into the direction that the operator, the hypnotist, wants it to go. And sometimes you can see that in the transcripts of the sessions with those people. So I guess the question is, what do you make of some of the terrestrial explanations? Do you buy that some terrestrial explanations are legitimate, that probably the number of abductions or experiences are much smaller than we've been led to believe by all the books and the magazines?
Okay, so yeah, there's a lot to respond to there.
Yes.
Now, I guess the first thing I would say is it really depends on how far down the rabbit hole you want to go in terms of wading into the high strangeness of the phenomena and all the seemingly unexplainable phenomena that come along with it that we don't really even have good language for. So I am going to do my best and not to get too unusual with regards to the answers and tackle some of the specific things. In fact, in order, you had mentioned sleep paralysis first.
Yes.
Now, when I was on the program, ABC's Seeing is Believing, the Peter Jennings special, a long time ago, and I think it was 2004, 2005 that came out, if I remember right. One of the things that they did with the program is they had several experiencers on telling their accounts, and then they would mix in a woman from Harvard, Susan Clancy, to give her sort of take on what was happening, and she really came out swinging against the experiencers, and in fact she wrote her own book on it. I think I might be paraphrasing the title, but it was something like How People Come to Feel That They've Been Abducted, something like that. And one of the things that she argues is, she goes, I know people have experiences in their bed. They think they're taken by aliens, but really what they're encountering is sleep paralysis. And she goes on to say something along the lines of, she goes, I know because I've had sleep paralysis myself. I know what they're going through. It's just that I'm scientific enough to understand what's happening. To which my response is, I have had sleep paralysis, and I imagine a lot of people out there have as well. And I have had encounters. I have had straight up contact encounters. And so I know the difference between sleep paralysis and other types of encounters because I've had both. I've had encounters that were nowhere near a bed and nowhere near asleep. And to say that some of the things that have happened to me that I include in what I share, it could potentially be sleep paralysis, that is not true. I've been paralyzed in bed. I felt a tingling sensation and a sort of odd feeling, but that is what it is. It's a completely different phenomena than being on a hill in a park with somebody else and three beings come up. So do some people have sleep paralysis and say, oh, so this is an abduction? Well, that wasn't really an abduction. This was just sleep paralysis. I now know the answer to this. Sure, that happens. I am of a perspective that I've had both, and I know the difference. But to many people, I think, yeah, they probably have sleep paralysis, and then say that they thought they had an abduction event. Yeah, of course. I bet you. I can't put the numbers on how many people that's been something that's happened, but sure, I bet that happens.
Well,
And
here's one of the problems that I have with this whole discussion of sleep paralysis, and I've talked to Kathleen Martin about it, for example, that there is no protocol to separate an experience of sleep paralysis from an alien abduction. In a lot of the cases, what the person who has actually suffered from sleep paralysis talks about are the same things that someone who's been abducted talks about. And I explored a case in 1976 with a woman named Pat Roach. And I am convinced now that she experienced sleep paralysis as opposed to an alien abduction, given the discussion that went on around that. I think the problem with that case is James Harder was the fellow that I used through APRO to help with the hypnotic regression of her. And now in today's environment, I can look back at how he operated, and I can see how he led her into the places he wanted her to go and avoided the places he didn't want to go. He was looking for a validation of the Barney and Betty Hill case, and he was using this as doing it. I am now convinced, based on everything that I have, and I was the first one to talk to her. She actually sent me a letter talking about the things that she said she knows how this could happen. And I went out to investigate that with James Harder. And this was a case of sleep paralysis. And in sleep paralysis, as you say, you wake up and you have this feeling of paralysis. But there's also about 80% of the cases that a person with sleep paralysis feels there's some kind of entity in the room with them. And so I can see how this can be taken by a researcher who has a bias leaning toward sleep, leaning toward finding an abduction experience, would manipulate the situation to take it into the direction of alien abduction, as opposed to trying to find out whether there is a more terrestrial explanation for it. And I think we have to be aware of that. And I know Kathleen Martin talked about establishing some protocols to separate sleep paralysis from alien abduction, but I don't know that those protocols have ever been established.
fair enough. And of course, in my defense, I bring out the whole don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, because there are some people, like I said a moment ago, that probably have sleep paralysis and then subjectively take the explanation somewhere where they necessarily shouldn't. That happens. Yeah, I believe that's one of the things that happens. Some people actually get taken. Some people have sleep paralysis and make hay out of it and say that they've been abducted. In two situations, and really all I can do, and really all I should do, is defend myself and my experiences, rather than talk about my experiences with other people that have had this type of phenomena happen to them, because I really think that's the most valuable way to approach this. Now, two situations I could point to that occurred in my bed. One of which I wasn't paralyzed at all. They didn't paralyze me at all. They just came into my room. There was no paralysis. They came to me. There were three grays. They had brought a hybrid with them into my room, and they wanted to see how I would interact with her. So there was no value in having me paralyzed. The whole time I was lucid, I was awake, I was able to move. There was no paralysis. And then another situation where I was paralyzed when they came to me was the situation where they had taken me on board, given me a cut on my arm, and there was a scar the next day. I did not have that cut on my arm when I went to bed the previous night. I had the cut on my arm when I woke up the next day. And then it was followed later that afternoon, that same afternoon afterwards, with the experience I mentioned a little bit earlier, where the gray mist came into the backyard with the gray entity in it, and there was the other witness to that. But so it was a situation. Well, if that was sleep paralysis, how did I cut my arm during sleep paralysis, and it magically healed overnight? So I don't include any of the things that I describe as, if there was anything that happened to me where I could have been like, that might have been sleep paralysis, but it felt like an abduction. I don't talk about any of that. I don't talk about anything that is on the fence. I only discuss things personally that have enough going for them that it wasn't some, I didn't misconstrue some sort of medical phenomena for an actual encounter.
Well, you've had ongoing experiences since you were 2 years old, from what you've said.
Mm-hmm.
So you can expect these encounters, not on necessarily a regular basis, but these encounters. Have you ever tried to set up any kind of video cameras or gather video evidence?
So the last thing that had happened to me of any sort of substance, again, it was when I was about 30. So me just having turned 50 last week was about 20 years ago. I didn't really have anything handy at the time. Technology now is super easy, right? You could pick up these little, remote, these little easy to use cameras that hook into your app on your phone or whatever. Yeah, but that wasn't readily available back when I was having these types of experiences on a regular basis. I don't know that I've had anything that is really worth talking about in the last couple decades. But what I know of the times that MUFON had tried to use technology right around the early 2000s, a lot of times the technology would fail when the recording technology would fail on nights where the experiencer claimed something happened to them. And it's something that I hear quite a lot, that the beings know that they understand our technology, they know how to thwart it. One of the best encounters sightings that MUFON had, I think this was 2013, I believe was the case. These gentlemen that were up in Canada hunting, and they saw a barbell-shaped object. The gentleman, the primary witness, he went to record it with his phone, found that his phone wouldn't work. He had a video camera, switched to that, and found that the video camera didn't work either. It wasn't until the object flew away that his technology started working again. And there were 3 witnesses to it. The guy was a contractor for the defense agencies, and he was a solid witness, and it was a fantastic case. But
well, let me interrupt here
mm-hmm.
for a couple of reasons. Number one, I've talked to Robert Powell about that case on this program. For those of you who are interested, I'll put a link in my blog that you can link to Robert Powell's discussion of this specific case. But there was evidence left behind with the failure of the equipment. There were blank spots. There was an underlying audio, I believe, that gave some kind of credence to what they said. There were 3 separate witnesses to the phenomenon. So it was, and it wasn't an abduction type scenario. So it diverts a little bit in that, but that is a very interesting case. Let me say this: your website is www.experiencer.me. The books are Experiencer Raised in Two Worlds and Experiencer When Two Worlds Collide. I will be back right after this with Bill to talk a little bit more about this. You are listening to A Different Perspective on the X Zone Broadcast Network, and we'll be back right after this, so please stick around. We're discussing alien abduction, or the term that Bill prefers, alien experiences, I suppose. When we went away, we were talking about the gathering of some kind of evidence, video evidence or electronic evidence of some kind. From what you said during that brief discussion, I understand to say you haven't had an experience in the last 20 years or so?
That is correct. There's a broader perspective on what's been happening in terms of the phenomena runs in the family, but myself, I haven't had anything as directly definable as an abduction or contact experience in a couple decades. And since I'll stop at that point to say that I'm not the only experiencer in my family, but I choose not to talk about what happens to the rest of my family. Pardon me for putting it out that way.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Now there's all kinds of questions asked, because here we've got a possibility of some kind of corroborative evidence, even if it is just a more witness testimony as opposed to something electronic or independent. And you say, well, we have these additional witnesses, but we're not going to talk about it. And I understand that. I mean, if I am to the point where I feel often that I'm intruding on people's lives when I start asking them questions about their UFO experiences, and some kind of enter those discussions, sticking my nose in where they don't really belong. Well, so I'll let you get away with that, because I kind of understand that. I kind of understand that. But it also sets up a situation where you could gather electronic evidence if you attempted to do so, or possibly could do that. But I guess it also moves to the question: why were you selected for these experiences? How did that come about? Do you have any clues why you were the ones singled out?
I don't know. It's a percentage of people have this happen to them. Certainly, describe these type of phenomena. It's just like a percentage of people get a specific type of disease, we'll say, just, or win the lottery, that sort of thing. With regards to a pattern, the closest I can look at to something that provides an explanation of any type is that it, like I said, it runs in my family. It's on my mom's side of the family. And so I think that, it's just one of those things that that's where I got it.
Do you know what their purpose is? What was the purpose of doing this?
I think because we're here. I think if people, our species, found another world out there with a species that wasn't up to our level of technology, and we were able to access their world and be able to study them up close and possibly in an intrusive fashion, I think people will do that one day. We'll find some planet out there, and we'll just sort of poke our noses in and see what we can learn. I just think that we're just a little bit lower on the food chain of another world that happened to get to us before we got to some other world of a lower technology than us.
Well, that kind of poses the question: what do you think of ancient alien theory?
Okay, so for me, the areas of my focus would be the abduction and contact phenomena, specifically as it happens to myself, those that I get a chance to meet, as well as the UFO phenomena here in Michigan, being a representative of the Michigan chapter of the Mutual UFO Network. So anything, for example, if you were to ask me about ancient alien theory or even Roswell, things like that, my disclaimer is my thoughts on that are completely subjective because of my inability to really directly access anything that counts as proof. Having said all that, I absolutely think it's very possible that if somebody's visiting our world now, they've been doing it for hundreds, even thousands of years. If the universe is obviously as old as it is, to me, there's no reason to think that there was a specific year this type of phenomena must have started happening. Like, like if you say, oh, this phenomena absolutely started in 1947 or whatever. Well, there's citing data before that, obviously, and so who gets to say what the inaugural year was of the UFO phenomena here on Earth? And
But
so
that's really not answering the question, because
okay.
the ancient ancient astronauts theory is that they came down and they assisted mankind in its evolution to civilization. And so the real question is, do you accept that idea that they've interacted with us and moved us along the path to civilization, or are they just merely observers gathering their data as, and pardon me, Jane Goodall, for saying, you observe them from outside to understand their society. So, I mean, do you think that the ancient astronaut theory is correct, that they helped build our civilizations?
Yeah, now that I have your definition of it, possibly. For me, the jury's really out on that. I don't doubt that they may have been visiting us, whether or not they had any direct hand in things. If you look at motive and opportunity, certainly they had the opportunity, and what might their motive be? Possibly they felt that there would be no issue in coming in and lending a hand to a primitive species as we were. And when they realized at a point where we were our technology had reached a certain point, they decided to hold back, because at some point we would no longer view them as gods and try to view them as equals. And that would be problematic for them. And that's why we see potential evidence for it possibly in the past. But then they backed away at a certain point. But I don't know. Again, that's just my subjective opinion, if it entertains anybody to hear it.
Well, that's our whole purpose here, is entertain people. But the problem I have with ancient astronauts theory, for example, is if they have the ability to cross interstellar distances, they obviously have metallurgy, and we've got these beings coming down, and the best building material they can find is stone. They supposedly erected the pyramids. Why didn't they introduce the metallurgy they have? If they're helping them build the pyramids and these other ancient wonders, why didn't they introduce some technology that would have been even more useful, such as metallurgy and things like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question.
And we have no response.
I don't. Yeah, I really I don't have a good response to that.
Well, the other thing that bothers me, and I took astronomy while I was in college because, frankly, I could, and so I understand the distances between stars, or among stars, I should say. The nearest star system is 4.1 light years away. It's Proxima Centauri with Alpha Centauri and Beta Centauri. The other stars are within 10, 12 light years away that we've discovered exoplanets around. But the distances seem to suggest that travel among the stars is going to take decades, if not centuries, unless you can master getting very close to the speed of light. And then you have the problem of the acceleration and deceleration and all of that sort of stuff that go along with it. So the question becomes, and I guess I could say I understand that our technology doesn't allow us to do that. But does that thought ever cross your mind that there's some technological difficulties in interstellar flight that may be impossible to defeat?
Well, no, I absolutely, I have no reservations that they can come here without any sort of the issues that we have with our modern day technology. I think a big error in relying heavily on modern science is that if you look at the scientific arc, if you go back several hundred years ago and say, how is it possible to get to the other side of the world that same day? And people say, absolutely not. You can't put enough paddles on a boat to get to the other side of the world. there's a limitation in our thinking just because we don't know what we don't know in terms of being able to get from here to there. And it's possible that it's not just a planet to planet scenario. They may be from some other dimension, however, that's best defined, where they're able to phase in and out of our reality in a way that our imaginations can't even come up with. Yeah, I think it's very easy to just look back at human history, and then if you were to go back, like I said, to any given point in time and ask them questions about how you do something without our level of technology, they're going to come up with some creative answers possibly, but for the most part, they'll say, no, that can't be done. But, given time, we've been able to achieve a lot of things that they used to say could never be done. And I think the same is true. I think as time goes by, we'll, I don't think we should sell ourselves short that we won't be able to figure it out ourselves, how to get there.
I think the point is we have a limiting factor in the universe, and it's pretty well established. That's it, and it's the speed of light, and we can't come close to that.
Again, I think that's our limitation of imagination at this point. I think that as time goes by, the thought of such a heavy reliance on the speed of light is going to seem quaint. I think at some point in the future, we haven't gotten there yet. But I really think that we're limiting ourselves to how we think the universe works now without a fuller understanding, which will progressively get over time.
But the scientific experimentation for the last 100 years has upheld the speed of light as being the limiting factor. And when we talk about the evolution of science, and I understand science evolves and things that we would have seen as impossible 50 years ago. I mean, this conversation would have been impossible 50 years ago with the various hookups in the various locations and how we're putting it out for people to listen to in their homes. The internet giving us the better communications than the Star Trek communicator. We have the entire history, knowledge of the human race in our cell phone. So I get that, but the scientific experimentation that we've looked at for the last 100 years hasn't provided us with any way to cross the interstellar distances.
Sure, we're just not there yet. That's my opinion. We just haven't cracked the nut yet.
So you're not going to tell me how it's done so that I can become extremely wealthy by suggesting how to defeat the speed of light.
Yes, somebody that's a lot smarter than me about that type of thing will figure it out. Hopefully it's my son, because he's pretty crafty that way.
There you go. We're going to have to take another break here. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation about UFO experiencers, maybe move it less from a less scientific discussion into something more about what your exact experiences were and that sort of thing. The website is www.experiencer.me. The books are Experiencer, Raised in Two Worlds, and Experiencer, Two Worlds Collide, and they're available on Amazon. And that sort of thing. My books, I think Encounter in the Desert, which is the Lonnie Zamora Socorro sighting, tried to run all that together, provides a, dare I say, a different perspective to the Zamora case and adds some evidence that hadn't been well researched prior to looking into it in depth, and the development of additional witnesses and that sort of thing that makes the case a little bit stronger for the experiences of Lonnie Zamora back in 1964, and the way the Air Force treated the case, which is extremely interesting. And take a look at Roswell in the 21st century, which I think is a cold case examination of where the Roswell case has gone and where it will go, and provides some insights into where we are on that. We will be back right after this. You're listening to A Different Perspective on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, and we'll be back right after this, so please stick around. We are back discussing alien abduction, also known as alien experiences, I guess. Normally, I point out in the some place in the program that we're practicing social distancing because I'm not in the studio with the producer, nor is he in the studio with the guest. We are scattered all over basically North America. But I didn't bring that up today because I am now fully vaccinated. I am one of those people that have had both shots. I'm ready to go out and, I guess, party down, as they say. Get ready to get back to normal. I just mentioned that as sort of an aside and give you an idea of where we are in the universe today. When we went away, we were talking, I think, in theoretical terms, I guess is the best way to put it. Because, I mean, currently we can't travel interstellar distances, and I am of the opinion that at some point we may be able to defeat that, but not by traveling at the speed of light, or other ways of defeating the distances. And I think physicists have talked about that. So I'm going to move us back into Bill's experiences. And I'm going to, I'm intrigued by this idea that your first experience was when you were 2 years old, and that you actually remember that. I was curious about that, if you could give us a little bit more information.
Okay, so with regards to my memories, I also have other memories from 2 and 3. In fact, my memory of age 3 is I almost fell into Niagara Falls. My brother had lifted me up. We were on the Canadian side, and he lifted me up on the wall, and I slipped, and he luckily caught me. So, if the alien wasn't my first memory, I certainly would have had other interesting first memories. But yeah, I was in my crib. I had not fallen asleep. It was warm. The curtains were open, and light was coming in. And as I lay there in the crib, this little being came in. To me, the closest thing I could approximate it to was a skeleton. But it didn't look fully skeletal. It clearly had flesh over its face, but still the giant eye sockets, which were filled with giant black eyes. And the thing looked down at me, just sort of regarded me momentarily. I screamed for my parents. And they told me from the other room. They didn't even get up. My mom just said, "Go back to sleep, go back to sleep." I'm like, go back to sleep? I haven't even been asleep. But after a moment, the thing, after it was done looking at me, walked out of the room. And yeah, that's my earliest memory.
When you say walked out of the room, did it use the door?
It walked in the open door to my room and walked out the open door to my room.
So it didn't manifest itself through the walls or anything like that. I think some of the people have talked about them able to move through walls.
I've seen it, but not at that time. One of the experiences I had, in fact, I even mentioned a little bit earlier when they had brought a hybrid in. They slid in sideways through the wall and slid out sideways through the wall.
What did the hybrid look like?
She looked mostly like us, just a little bit, I don't know if I want to use the word tainted, but that probably makes sense. They didn't have any clothes on her. She had a vibe and appearance that suggested she may have been about 16, something like that. Her hair was very disheveled and sparse, and she was, I guess, had sort of a balding appearance, and she was very nervous, very shy. The reason for her visit, it seemed to be, how would I react to them bringing her into my room? There were 3 beings that stood behind her, and as I sat there in bed, just puzzled by what was going on, and she seemed equally puzzled, I mentally projected to them, "What's her name?" And they responded to me, "Yes, what's her name?" And so I said, I thought of the nicest thing I could come up with as a name. I said, "Angel." And they were excited. They didn't physically display excitement, but mentally responded in excitement that I had given her a name. And they were satisfied with that, and then they left.
It wasn't a Via Boas type experiment then?
No. There was physical contact with her that I had a couple years later, but it wasn't the type of intercourse thing that other people describe, and as you're possibly referencing, well, certainly referencing. But 2 years later, I was on board, and she came up to me, and much more confident, much more assured, and she started to massage my temples with her fingers, and said this should get the blood flowing, and I passed out. That's the extent of that memory.
So you've had multiple contacts, obviously, and you say on board. Where was the ship? Do you have any idea where it was?
Where in the?
Was it in orbit? Was it out in the backyard?
No idea. My memory starts and ends on board. And when I say on board, could it have been a structure and not a flying craft? Possibly. I just knew that I was in a structure, and it felt like it was a UFO, though not having seen the outside, walking into it, or vice versa. I just know that I was within a structure, yeah, admittedly. And the room that I was in was a sort of a activity room, in that it was circular, and it had a sort of a raised area, almost arena style, where the entities could look in on and down at the room, what was happening inside the room.
Let me go off in a different direction here for a moment. You were at one time, or are you still the state director for Michigan?
Still am, 17 years now. Mm-hmm.
Okay, you investigate UFO sightings.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Do you think that your experiences bias your investigations at all?
Well, I am not primarily an investigator. My duties are don't have me doing direct investigation as much as much of the rest of our team. We have a solid chief investigator with Daniel Snow, a great team of investigators that he oversees. And while every investigation does come across my desk, I do look at the cases reported. I do look at who these are being reported to. I do review them after the fact. And certainly everybody who has any skin in this game will understandably have some bias. I recognize, that my bias is that, something seems to be happening that involves a combination of creatures and craft. It doesn't directly affect my work, my duty as a MUFON state director, because I don't have my hands directly into the investigative process as others do. Might every one of those single investigators have their own bias? Well, they might, they might probably do. But my biases don't interfere with the work being done by the team.
But what I'm looking at is more inclined to accept witness statements without following them directly to the end, the possible end, to find a mundane solution. How many of the cases that you see or are investigated by your team are explained in the mundane, as opposed to how many are left as unknowns?
It can vary year to year between 80 to 95% of things that we can declare that we can identify. The big thing that we're getting nowadays is people seeing Starlink satellites and thinking they're UFOs. And, we have people report Chinese lanterns or sky lanterns or drones, certainly, all sorts of aircraft and celestial objects. When we do an investigation, first of all, we have an all-volunteer army. None of our investigators are paid. So these are people, for the most part, either retired or working 9-to-5 jobs, who do this in whatever spare time they can, and to the best of their ability, try to identify things with the training we give them. And when they can't, they stop at the water's edge and say, this is unidentified. We don't make any sort of leap of faith that it's, this type of being from this type of world, etc. it's simply unidentified, and it's a very small percentage of cases that get to that point. Now, if there was somebody that was paid in this position, and they had, their livelihood was to take it that extra, maybe couple steps, it might creep up the percentage of identifieds slightly. But we do the best what we can with the training that's available and with the workforce we have, which is again an all volunteer army.
Do you get many cases of abduction or experience?
Those cases do come in. There is a separate track for those, and if you had Kathy Martin on your show, she may have very well spoken about that. The experiencer research team that MUFON has is a group that's sort of autonomous within MUFON. They don't have the same sort of strict state boundary lines as the sightings do. And so if an abduction case comes in, a contact case comes in, they want to speak with somebody, and there isn't a UFO as part of the sighting report. If there's no UFO, but there is a contact, it pretty much goes straight to our experiencer research team, and they look into it. And that's headed up by Kathy.
So you don't really do abduction investigations then?
If there is a sighting of a UFO and it involves an entity, there is sort of that overlap area where somebody, an investigator, a state investigator may actually dabble into that side of it, but they are very separate types of phenomena in that when somebody sees a UFO, they'll be like, oh, I saw a light at this particular height in the sky. It did this type of maneuver. Yeah, I saw it for maybe 3 seconds. And then when you talk about contact experience, many times people are, a fun term is frequent flyers. They have several encounters over their lifetime, and they have a really long, very drawn out story that is beyond just checking the boxes of what happened for a few seconds on some given night. It's a very different type of phenomena to report, and so the reporting forms that we have for it and the way to take in the information is understandably different because of that.
Well, Bill, we've run out of time. Enjoyed the conversation. Think we've learned some things here. Thank you for taking time out of your day to share your experience with us. So thank you very much, and I will be in touch with you later on.
Cool, thanks, Kevin. Yep, your Roswell book back in the day was an inspiration to a guy getting into the UFO field, so thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Once again, that's www.experiencer.me, and Experiencer Raised in Two Worlds is where experiences when two worlds collide. As he mentioned, I've done a number of Roswell books. I've done a number of books on UFOs. Take a look at them. The Best of Project Blue book takes a look at the Air Force investigation and some of the cases that haven't gotten a lot of exposure over the years. I think that there's some very good cases there that we need to take a look at, and gives us a different impression of what the Air Force was doing and how they were doing it, or what they were doing and how they manipulated the situation and that sort of thing. So I think you'll find that to be an interesting book. Coming up is UFOs in the Deep State, and that'll be available in just a couple of weeks. And I think that'll be an interesting take on the UFO phenomenon and how it's been manipulated by the government entities. So there you go, take a look at that. And as I say, Roswell in the 21st century, I think gives you a different perspective of the Roswell case. You have been listening to A Different Perspective on the X Zone Broadcast Network. I'll be back in 167 hours, so thanks for tuning in.